Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxing History Time. Tonight we walk straight into a winter you cannot pause, rewind or mute. You stand on the open edge of the Old West as the sun sinks low, and the air already feels sharp enough to bite. Snow does not drift gently here. It scours, it scrapes. It settles into every seam of clothing and every weak plan you thought you had. You probably will not survive this if you arrive unprepared. And that is not dramatic language. It is simply the math of cold plus distance plus human limits. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to post your location and your local time. Somewhere out there, winter might already be tapping on your window. Now dim the lights. You are already here. Boots pressed into frozen ground that does not forgive mistakes. The cold is not loud at first. It sneaks in quietly, slipping through wool leather and optimism. You breathe in and the air feels dry and brittle, like it might snap inside your lungs. This is the Old West in minus temperatures, and it does not care whether you are brave, hopeful or tired. The first thing you notice is how quickly warmth becomes a currency. Every decision you make revolves around keeping it, stealing it back from the night, or at least slowing its escape. Out here, winter is not a season. It is an occupying force. Historical records confirm that temperatures in parts of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain regions routinely dropped far below zero during the 19th century, sometimes lingering there for weeks. Thermometers existed, yes, but many settlers never owned one, so cold was measured in sensations. How fast your fingers stiffened. How long breath lingered in the air. Whether the dog refused to leave the shelter. You pull your coat tighter, but it is not enough. It is never enough. The wind has a way of finding gaps you did not know existed. It slides down your spine, curls around your ankles and settles into your bones like it plans to stay. There is a strange sound to extreme cold, a faint creaking and popping, as wood contracts and ice tightens its grip on everything. You hear it now in the distance, like the land itself is complaining. People in the Old West did not talk about hypothermia the way we do today. The word existed, but the understanding did not. They spoke instead of being chilled through, of the cold settling in of a weariness that came with shivering too long. A mainstream fact often overlooked is that many winter deaths were not dramatic blizzards or frozen travellers found in snowdrifts. They were quiet evenings where someone sat too close to the fire, stood up too fast, and simply did not wake the next morning. Cold exhaustion, as it was sometimes called, blended into everyday hardship. You walk toward a small settlement, maybe only a handful of buildings huddled together, as if for moral support. Smoke curls weakly from a chimney, thin and precious. Firewood is stacked carefully, each log a promise of another hour alive. You can smell it now, that sharp, comforting scent of burning pine mixed with damp earth. It feels like safety, but it is fragile. Fires go out, fires spread. Fires demand constant feeding, and winter never sleeps. There is a strange comfort in knowing everyone around you is fighting the same invisible enemy. At the same time, it makes the danger feel heavier. If one family runs out of fuel, the others might not have enough to spare. Historians still argue whether communal sharing during harsh winters was driven more by genuine solidarity or by the practical understanding that losing neighbours weakened everyone left behind. Either way, the result was the same. Survival became a group project whether you liked your neighbours or not. You step inside a rough cabin and the temperature barely changes. The walls creak softly and frost feathers cling to the inside corners. This is normal. Some settlers even accepted indoor ice as a sign of a well-sealed structure, believing it meant moisture was not destroying the walls. A quirky tidbit from diaries of the era describes people scraping frost from interior walls in the morning, not as a novelty, but as a routine chore like sweeping the floor. Your hands ache now, a deep dull pain that pulses with your heartbeat. You flex your fingers slowly, careful not to crack the skin. Cold does not always announce damage right away. That is part of its cruelty. It numbs first, convinces you everything is fine, then collects its payment later. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the door just enough to remind you it is waiting. As you settle onto a rough bench near the fire, you notice how people move differently in winter. Nothing is rushed. Sudden movements waste energy and invite accidents. Every motion is economical, almost thoughtful. Even children learn this early, their play quieter, closer to home. The Old West winter trained patience the hard way. You listen to the sounds around you. The fire snaps softly. Someone coughs. Somewhere outside, snow brushes against the wall with a faint whisper. There is no romance in this moment, despite what later stories might suggest. There is focus. There is endurance. There is the unspoken agreement that tomorrow will require the same effort all over again. And yet you feel something else too, a strange clarity. When survival narrows your priorities, life becomes simple in a way modern comfort rarely allows. Warmth, food, shelter, community, everything else fades into the background. Some scholars debate whether this enforced simplicity contributed to the legendary toughness associated with frontier life, or whether it merely filtered out those who could not adapt quickly enough. Either way, you are here now, breathing carefully, learning fast. The cold presses in again as the fire settles into embers. Someone stands to add another log, and sparks briefly illuminate the room, tiny stars against dark wood. You feel your eyelids grow heavy, not from comfort, but from the constant effort of staying warm. Sleep in winter is never casual. It is negotiated, bargained for, and sometimes dangerous. As the night deepens, you understand the first and most important lesson of surviving minus temperatures in the Old West. Cold is not an event, it is a condition. It shapes every choice, every relationship, every plan. You do not conquer it. You coexist with it cautiously, respectfully, and always aware that it can win if you forget yourself for even a moment. You draw closer to the fading fire, letting its warmth touch your face. Outside, the wind continues its patient work and winter settles in for another long night. You wake without fully waking, the kind of half-awareness that comes from sleeping in the cold. Your eyes stay closed, but you already know the fire has burned low. The air feels sharper than before, and your breath fogs immediately. This is how mornings begin out here, not with light or sound, but with temperature. You sit up slowly, joints stiff, and pause to listen. No howling wind yet, which is a small mercy. You've learned very quickly that cold announces itself in stages. Before weather reports and phone alert, settlers relied on signs that feel almost animal in their simplicity. You step outside and the ground crunches underfoot, not with snow, but with frozen soil. That sound matters. A dry crunch means deep cold. A softer squeaking sound from snow means it is even colder. The crystals fractured by extreme temperatures. This was common knowledge on the frontier, passed casually between people who could not afford to be wrong. A mainstream historical fact is that by the late 19th century, the US Signal Service attempted to standardize weather observations, but most rural settlers still depended on instinct and experience rather than distant reports. You lift your eyes to the sky. It is painfully clear. No clouds, no haze, just a hard blue that seems to drain heat from the land. Clear skies often meant colder nights, a pattern settlers recognized long before atmospheric science explained it. Someone mutters that it's going to be a bitter one today, and you do not need a thermometer to agree. Thermometers did exist, often alcohol-based rather than mercury for extreme cold, but many froze or shattered. A frozen thermometer was useless, but also a warning. If the tool designed to measure cold had surrendered, you knew what you were facing. You check the animals next. They know things before you do. Horses stand with their backs to the windtails, clamped tight. Chickens refuse to leave the coop. Even the dog hesitates, lifting one paw then another, and testing the ground like it might bite back. Frontier journals often note animal behavior as a primary weather guide. One quirky tidbit describes a farmer trusting his cat more than any barometer, claiming the way it tucked its nose into its tail predicted cold better than any instrument. Your breath feels heavier today, each inhale a careful act. Cold air can sting the throat, and people learn to wrap scarves or cloth loosely over their mouths, not for style but to warm the air slightly before it reached the lungs. Historians still argue whether repeated exposure to extreme cold strengthened respiratory systems or simply killed off those who were more vulnerable, leaving behind a population that appeared unusually hardy. You move back inside and start the fire again, coaxing life from embers. Fire starting in the cold is slower, more deliberate. Wood snaps differently, moisture locked inside by ice. You hold your hands close, feeling the ache as circulation returns, that painful bloom of pins and needles. This pain is familiar to everyone here. It is unpleasant but also reassuring. It means your body is still responding. Without modern forecast planning to bed on reading patterns, a ring around the moon, a sudden stillness in the air. The way sound carried farther on cold days, voices travelling unnaturally long distances across frozen ground. You notice it now, a shout from another cabin sounding closer than it should. Cold air is denser, and settlers knew this long before physics classes explained why. It made winter feel smaller and more exposed, as if privacy itself had frozen away. You layer clothing with intention. Not everything goes on at once. Too many layers too early make you sweat, and sweat is dangerous. Moisture steals heat faster than cold air ever could. This balance between warmth and dryness becomes an obsession. People spoke of dressing for the work, not the temperature, a rule learned through mistakes that could cost fingers or toes. Frostbite was not always dramatic. Often it was discovered hours later, skin pale and waxy sensation gone. Treatment was debated even then. Some believed rubbing snow on frozen skin helped. Others warned it caused more damage. Historians still debate how much of frostbite folklore was based on observation and how much on desperate trial and error. You think about how strange it is to trust your life to sensations and signs rather than numbers. But numbers can fail. Batteries die. Instruments break. Your breath, your skin, the behaviour of animals and the look of the sky do not lie as easily. There is a rhythm to it, almost meditative. Check the sky, feel the wind, listen to the ground, adjust your plans. By mid-morning, the sun rises but offers little comfort. Light does not equal warmth here. Shadows remain sharp and anything shaded stays locked in ice. Water left outside freezes solid in minutes. Even inside buckets develop skins of ice overnight. You break it with a dull crack, the sound echoing in the quiet room. It feels like the whole world is brittle. Someone mentions a cold snap from years back when the temperature dropped so low that trees exploded with a sound like gunfire as sap froze and expanded. This actually happened, recorded in multiple frontier accounts. It is a reminder that cold is not passive. It moves. It breaks things. It announces itself in violence if ignored. You plan the day carefully. Chores are grouped to minimize trips outside. Travel is reconsidered entirely. Distance behaves differently in cold. What looks manageable on a map becomes lethal when wind and exposure are factored in. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about how often settlers underestimated winter travel risks versus being forced into dangerous journeys by necessity. Sometimes you simply had to go no matter the signs. As the day settles into its slow, pale rhythm, you feel the mental shift that winter brings. Time stretches. Patience deepens. Every small success, a fire kept alive, a face warmed, feels earned. You glance once more at the sky, committing its colour and clarity to memory. Out here, reading the cold is not a skill you admire. It is one you practice daily because guessing wrong is not an option. You pull your coat tighter and step back into the work of staying alive. You dress slowly, not out of laziness, but respect. Clothing is your first defence, and mistakes here follow you all day. the farric smell faintly of smoke, sweat, and animal fat, a scent that never quite leaves winter garments. You lift each piece with care, checking seams, shaking out stiff folds where frost formed overnight. In the Old West, clothing was rarely specialized. There were no ski jackets or thermal ratings. What you wore was what you owned, and what you owned had to adapt. You start with what touches the skin, linen or cotton shirts, sometimes wool. If you could tolerate the itch, though wool against out bare skin could drive some people half mad. It scratches, it traps heat, and when damp it smells stronger, but it stays warm even when wet. That quality alone made it precious. A mainstream historical fact is that wool was so valued on the frontier that worn-out blankets were often cut and reshaped into coats or leggings, their original purpose sacrificed for survival. Over that comes another layer and then another. Not thick, but multiple. The idea is to trap air, not bulk. You've learned this the hard way. Too much weight restricts movement, and movement creates heat. People debated this endlessly. Some swore by heavy buffalo robes, others by lighter layers you could adjust. Historians still argue whether layered clothing or single heavy garments offered better protection in extreme cold, especially during physical labour. Your hands get special attention. Mittens are better than gloves, everyone knows that. Fingers share warmth when they can touch. Leather mittens lined with fur or wool are common, though stiff and awkward. Dexterity is sacrificed for warmth, and tools feel clumsier in your grip. There is a quirky tidbit from a trapper's journal describing how he learned to tie knots with mittens on, because removing them even briefly caused his fingers to seize with pain. You wrap something around your neck, scarf or strip of cloth, pulling it up over your mouth when the wind sharpens. Breath freezes into the fibres, forming tiny crystals that sparkle briefly before melting again. This is not uncomfortable. It is familiar. What you fear is sweat. Sweat is betrayal in winter. It clings, cools, and drains heat long after you stop moving. Settlers often stopped mid-tuss to open coats, venting heat deliberately, a practice that seems counterintuitive until you feel the danger yourself. Your legs are wrapped in wool trousers, sometimes layered over long underwear if you have it. Many do not. Instead, they rely on leggings made from hides tied on with leather thongs. They creak softly as you walk, stiffened by cold. Snow brushes against them, leaving damp trails that freeze solid within minutes. You can hear it, a faint crackling as ice forms. Boots are a constant compromise. Leather alone is not enough, but thick soles make walking clumsy. Some people stuff straw newspaper or dried grass inside for insulation. It works sort of until it does not. Once damp, it freezes. Then your feet are wrapped in cold. A strange but documented practice involved rubbing animal fat into boots to repel moisture, a messy but effective method. The smell lingered, but warmth mattered more than comfort. Hats are not optional. Heat escapes upward, and everyone knows it, even if the science is fuzzy. Fur caps with ear flaps are common, pulled down low. Others use wide-brimmed hats layered with scarves underneath. Hair freezes, lashes stick together, eyebrows frost over. You blink slowly, careful not to snap ice from your lashes too roughly. Clothing maintenance never stops. You dry garments by the fire, turning them constantly to avoid scorching. Burn holes are patched quickly because even a small gap invites cold. Sewing in winter is not a hobby, it is a necessity. Women and men both stitch by lamplight fingers, stiff eyes strained knowing a failed seam could mean frostbite tomorrow. There are myths too. Some believe wearing too much causes weakness, that exposure builds resilience. Others insist that cold cannot harm you if you stay busy. These beliefs are tested daily and often disproven painfully. Historians still debate how much frontier toughness was learned behaviour versus survival bias. Those who believed the wrong thing too long simply did not leave records behind. You step outside again, feeling how the layers settle as you move. There is a rhythm to it. Bend, stretch, adjust. The cold presses in, but it does not reach your skin yet. That is success. You feel bulky, slower, but protected. The sound of your movement changes. Fabric brushes, fabric hides, creak, snow crunches. You sound larger than you are, like the winter has added weight to your presence. You notice others adjusting too. A neighbour loosens a coat before lifting a heavy load. Someone else tightens a scarf as the wind shifts. These small movements are constant, almost unconscious. Clothing becomes a language everyone speaks fluently by necessity. The sun climbs higher, though it offers little warmth. Light glints off snow bright enough to sting your eyes. Some people darken the skin under their eyes with soot to reduce glare, an improvised solution borrowed from indigenous practices. It works, and no one questions it. Out here, practicality trumps pride. As the morning deepens, you feel a cautious confidence in your layers hold. Your body stays dry. You're not warm exactly, but you are not losing heat either. In winter, that balances everything. Clothing does not defeat the cold. It negotiates with it, buying you hours, sometimes days, to live another routine, another fire, another night. You pull your mittens tighter and step forward ready to work, knowing that every thread, every hide, every careful choice is part of the thin barrier between you and the cold waiting patiently just beyond your clothes. You step inside a home that does not quite feel like shelter yet. The door closes, the wind dulls, but the cold remains lingering like a guest who refuses to leave. Homes in the Old West were not designed for comfort in the modern sense. They were designed to slow heat loss, nothing more. You stand still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the dim interior, noticing how every surface seems to absorb sound. Even voices soften in winter. The walls around you are thick in places, thin in others. Logs stacked and chinked with mud, straw, and whatever else could be packed into the gaps. Some cabins smell faintly of damp earth because the mud never fully dries in winter. Records from frontier settlements describe families re-chinking walls every autumn, a seasonal ritual as important as harvesting food. Miss a crack and winter will find it always does. In other regions, especially on the plains, homes were built from the land itself. Sod houses sit low and heavy, their walls cut from thick prairie grass and soil. You brush your hand along one and feel cold moisture seep into your glove. These homes stay surprisingly warm once heated, insulated by earth, but they come with their own problems. Mice nest in the walls. Bugs wake unexpectedly during thaws. Still many settlers preferred sod to wood because wood was scarce and precious. Contemporary accounts suggest sod houses often held heat better during prolonged cold spells. The roof matters more than you expect. Heat rises and poorly sealed roofs leak warmth relentlessly. Inside you see cloth or old blankets tacked overhead. An improvised ceiling meant to trap warm air below. Smoke stains darken the fabric, evidence of countless fires burned beneath it. Fireplaces are small, inefficient, and hungry. Every flame demands fuel, and fuel demands labour. You notice frost creeping along the interior walls, delicate white patterns like feathers. This is not a failure. It is accepted. People learn to accept indoor ice as part of winter living. One odd but well-documented habit involved scraping frost off the walls in the morning to keep moisture from dripping as temperatures rose slightly during the day. Homes breathed with the weather expanding and contracting, cracking and settling. Furniture is sparse and functional. Beds are raised off the floor because cold pools low. Underneath, sometimes stones warmed by the fire are placed to release heat slowly through the night. This practice appears in multiple settler diaries, though later researchers have questioned how effective it truly was versus how comforting it felt psychologically. Comfort, after all, has its own survival value. You sit near the fire, not too close. Sparks jump without warning, and burns are dangerous when medical care is distant. Chimneys are crude, often little more than stacked stone or mud. They smoke constantly. Your eyes sting, but smoke is better than freezing. The smell of it sinks into hair-clothed skin until it becomes part of you. Draft snake along the floor, cold fingers brushing your ankles. People stuff rags into gaps beneath doors, sometimes rolling entire blankets to block airflow. Nothing is wasted. Broken furniture becomes firewood. Crates become stools. Every object earns its place or disappears. Night falls early, or at least it feels that way. Darkness and cold are close companions. Lamps burn animal, fat or oil, casting a soft, uneven glow. Light is rationed too. You do not linger awake unnecessarily. Sleep conserves energy, but sleeping cold is risky. Too warm and you sweat. Too cold and you might not wake. The balance is delicate, learned through repetition. Families often sleep together, bodies sharing warmth beneath layers of quilts and hides. Privacy yields to necessity. Children curl close, breathing softly, while adults remain half awake, listening to the fire, the wind, the sounds of the structure settling. Modern historians are divided on whether these crowded sleeping arrangements reduced winter mortality or simply reflected limited space. What is certain is that solitude was rare in winter homes. You hear the wind again pressing against the walls, testing weaknesses. The house responds with creaks and sighs, a conversation older than language. You learn to recognize normal sounds and fear the unfamiliar ones. A sudden crack could mean a beam shifting. A new whistle could signal a fresh draft. As you lie back staring at the dim ceiling, you realize these homes are not barriers. They are buffers. They do not stop winter. They slow it and negotiate with it. Buy time. Survival depends on constant attention, on listening, adjusting, repairing. The house is alive in its own way, and you are responsible for keeping it that way. The fire settles into embers. Someone stirs it gently. Outside, the cold waits patient and unbothered. Inside, you breathe steadily, wrapped in wood-earth smoke and shared effort, knowing that morning will bring the same careful dance all over again. You wake to the soft collapse of embers, a faint sound like sand shifting. Fire never truly rests here. It only dozes, waiting for attention. You rise carefully, joints stiff, and kneel near the hearth. The ashes pale and powdery, still holding warmth beneath the surface. You blow gently, coaxing a glow to return. This small ritual begins and ends every winter day. Fire is not comfort. Fire is survival math. How much fuel you have, how fast it burns, how long until you can replace it. Period accounts from Western settlements show that families often burned through winter wood supplies faster than planned, forcing dangerous midwinter trips for more. That risk calculation never leaves your mind. Every log placed on the fire carries weight beyond its size. You feed the flames sparingly, watching how it takes. Greenwood hisses and smokes while dry wood snaps sharply, sending sparks upward. You learn to read fire the same way you read the sky. Too much smoke means poor draw or damp fuel. Too many sparks mean wood that could ignite the roof. Chimney fires are a constant fear. One spark lodged in soot, one strong draft, and the whole structure could go up in minutes. There are accounts of families standing barefoot in snow watching their only shelter burn because a chimney ignited in the night. The hearth becomes the centre of the home. Cooking happens here. Drying clothes happens here. Conversations happen here. People gravitate toward it instinctively, arranging stools and benches in a loose circle. You feel your face warm while your back stays cold, a familiar imbalance. Turning slowly, rotating like meat on a spit becomes second nature. Fuel is not just wood. Dried animal dung is common on the plains where trees are scarce. It burns slowly and evenly with little flame but steady heat. The smell is strong but fades with time and no one complains. Survival dulls the sense of offence. This practice, noted in multiple frontier journals, was borrowed directly from indigenous knowledge refined long before settlers arrived. Some later writers dismissed it as primitive, but those who tried it understood its value immediately. You step outside to check the woodpile. Snow has crusted over the top and you knock it away with a boot. Each log is heavy with cold. Carrying them inside warms you briefly, but sweat threatens. You pause, letting your breath slow before adding more wood to the fire. Staying dry remains the unspoken rule. Fire management shapes daily schedules. You wake earlier in winter to rekindle warmth before the cold settles too deeply into walls and floors. Nights are punctuated by waking to tend embers. sleeping through without checking the fire risks waking to frozen breath and stiff limbs. There is discussion among historians about whether chronic sleep disruption affected long-term health or whether people adapted more fully than modern bodies might. Children learn fire safety early, not through lectures but observation. They watch sparks learn distances, understand heat without the thermometers. Burns happen though rarely recorded in detail. Pain is acknowledged briefly, then folded into routine. The greater fear is cold. You notice how silence feels different when the fire fades. Sound carries less. The house seems to shrink. Fire is not just heat, it is noise, light, reassurance. When it dims, anxiety rises quietly. People talk less, movement slow. There are superstitions too. Some believe letting a fire go out completely invites misfortune. Others insist it angers protective spirits. One strange belief held that a steady fire kept illness at bay, not entirely wrong given the warmth and dryness it provided. Modern researchers still debate how much winter illness was linked directly to cold versus indoor smoke and poor ventilation. Ventilation is a trade-off. You crack a door or window slightly to reduce smoke, but every gap invites cold. Eyes water. Lungs ache. Yet too much smoke makes breathing harder over time. People endure coughing fits, soot-blackened walls and stinging eyes because the alternative is worse. As evening settles, the fire burns lower but steadier. You sit close, hands extended, feeling the ache of returning warmth. Outside, darkness presses in. Wind scrapes the walls. Inside, the fire answers with soft pops and murmurs. You realize that tending fire is not a chore. It is a conversation. Feed it right and it protects you. Neglect it and it withdraws or turns against you. This relationship shapes winter days more than any clock ever could. As you bank the embers for the night, covering them with ash to slow their burn, you feel a cautious satisfaction. The fire will last. For now. You settle back wrapped in its fading glow, knowing that before long, you will rise again to wake it, because in this cold fire, never truly sleeps, and neither do you. You eat not because you are hungry, but because winter demands it. Food in the cold is fuel measured less by taste and more by how long it keeps you going. You sit near the fire bowl in your hand, steam rising briefly before disappearing into the dry air. Meals are heavy, repetitive, and strangely comforting. Variety is a luxury best saved for warmer months. Daily rations lean toward fat and starch. Salt pork, bacon, beans, cornmeal, and dried potatoes appear again and again. These foods store well and burn slowly in the body. Accounts from Western homesteads show winter calorie intake rising dramatically compared to summer, sometimes doubling. People did not talk about metabolism, but they understood the result. Eat more, stay warmer longer. You chew slowly, aware of how heat spreads from your stomach outward, a gentle push against the cold. Fat is especially prized. Butter is eaten sparingly but appreciated deeply. Rendered animal fat is used in cooking, spread on bread, even swallowed plain in desperate situations. One unusual detail noted in personal letters describes settlers drinking warm grease during extreme cold snaps, believing it created an internal fire. Whether it truly helped or simply felt reassuring is still debated among nutrition historians. Protein matters too. Jerky hangs from rafters, tough and smoky. Stews simmer for hours, extracting every bit of energy from bones and scraps. Long cooking softens meat and fills the house with warmth and smell. The scent of stew becomes part of winter memory, rich and lingering, clinging to walls and clothing. Fresh food is scarce. Root vegetables are pulled from cellars or buried pits, sometimes half-frozen, sometimes rotting. You cut away the bad parts without ceremony. Waste is unthinkable. Milk freezes, then separates when thawed but is used anyway. Eggs are stored in strange ways, submerged in grease or packed in ash. Some methods work better than others, and failures are quietly endured. There is discussion among scholars about how well winter diets actually supported health. While high-calorie intake helped maintain body heat, vitamin deficiencies were common. Scurvy appeared even in inland settlements, not just at sea. People knew something was wrong, describing weakness, bleeding gums, or lingering fatigue, but rarely understood why. Remedies range from eating wild berries preserved from autumn to drinking pine needle tea, an indigenous practice that provided vitamin C. Its effectiveness is now well understood, though at the time it was treated as folk wisdom. You notice how meals structure the day. Breakfast warms you for work. Midday food is quick and functional. Evening meals are slow to labor, meant to carry you through the long night. Eating too late or too much before sleep risks sweating under blankets, another quiet danger. Alcohol appears on the table, sometimes especially whiskey. Many believe it warms the body. It feels that way at first, a rush of heat to the skin. But experienced winter survivors are cautious. They know that alcohol actually increases heat loss by widening blood vessels. This understanding is uneven learned through loss more than science. Some still swear by it. Others avoid it entirely during extreme cold. Children are encouraged to eat even when they resist. Appetite fades in winter for some, but energy needs rise. Parents coax, bargain, insist. Thinness in winter is alarming. Weight loss is not a goal, it is a warning. Food preparation is labour-intensive, grinding corn by hand, soaking beans overnight, chopping frozen meat with an axe. Your hands numb, then ache, then numb again. You work near the fire, but not too close, balance always. As night deepens, you finish your meal and set the bowl aside. Satisfaction settles in quiet and steady. Food does not solve winter, but it gives you leverage. It fuels movement, thought, patience. It makes the cold manageable, at least for a while. You lean back, feeling the warmth linger inside you, a small but vital flame. Outside, the cold presses in unchanged. Inside, your body hums, softly fed and ready to endure another stretch of winter darkness. You reach for water and hesitate. In winter, thirst is easy to ignore, but water is never simple out here. Buckets left by the door are solid by morning ice, thick enough to crack with a dull echoing sound. You strike it carefully, watching shards slide and clink against the wood. Even indoors, water resists staying liquid, as if it wants to return to the land it came from. Most settlements rely on wells, but wells freeze too. The rope stiffens, the pulley groans, and the bucket sometimes comes up rimmed with ice water sloshing beneath a fragile crust. Letters from homesteaders describe hauling water multiple times a day just to prevent the wellhead from sealing over completely. Some wrapped the opening with straw or hides, others built small sheds around it, creating a pocket of trapped warmth. None of it was perfect. You pour water into a pot and set it near the fire, not on it. Boiling takes time and fuel is precious. Warm water is easier on the body in winter, a lesson learned through sore teeth and aching jaws. Cold water shocks the system, tightening muscles, slowing breath. People did not speak of it scientifically, but they felt the difference. Snow seems like an obvious solution, but melting it takes far more fuel than you expect. Snow is mostly air. It shrinks dramatically, leaving you with little reward for the effort. Still, during blizzards or deep freezes, snow becomes the only option. Some accounts mention people eating snow directly, despite knowing it chilled them further, a choice made when thirst outweighed caution. Ice is cleaner than snow usually, and chunks cut from frozen streams are stored near the house. You chip away at one now, careful not to slip. Frozen waterways are dangerous in winter, their surface is deceptive. One step too far, one thin patch, and cold water claims you in seconds. Survival guides of the era warned against travelling near rivers in deep winter advice, often ignored out of necessity. Inside, water containers are kept close to heat rotated constantly. If left unattended, they freeze. If too close, they crack or spill. Wooden buckets split, metal ones burn skin. Everything has a failure point. You learn them all. Bathing is rare. Not from lack of desire, but practicality. Heating enough water takes time and fuel. Wet skin in winter is risky. People spot clean instead, washing hands, faces, and feet when possible. Cleanliness shifts from ritual to strategy. One odd winter habit involves storing drinking water in glass bottles wrapped in cloth and buried under bedding at night, using body heat to keep it liquid. It worked mostly. Spills were disasters. Frozen glass shattered easily, and broken bottles meant lost water and injury. There is no clear agreement among modern researchers on how much dehydration affected winter mortality. Symptoms are subtle: fatigue, confusion, headaches, all easily blamed on cold or hunger. You sip slowly now, aware of how precious each mouthful is. You listen to the sound of water as it moves, a quiet comfort. In winter, water noise means life. Flowing water under ice, a kettle, warming a bucket, sloshing gently, silence is worrying. As evening approaches, you refill containers, anticipating another cold night. You place them carefully, thinking ahead. Winter rewards foresight and punishes forgetfulness. You settle near the fire cup, warm in your hands, feeling the heat seep in. Outside, everything is locked in ice. Inside, water remains fluid just barely because you're paying attention. In the Old West, survival often came down to such small victories. A bucket that did not freeze, a well that still opened, a body that stayed hydrated enough to endure one more cold night. You drink again slowly and listen to the quiet persistence of water resisting the freeze just like you. You step outside and immediately feel it. The wind has changed. Not stronger, not louder, just sharper, more deliberate. Cold alone is heavy, but wind gives it intelligence. It searches, it probes, it finds skin seams and mistakes with unsettling precision. You turn your face away instinctively, pulling fabric higher already, calculating how long you can stay out here. On the open plains, wind is rarely blocked. There are no trees tall enough, no hills close enough. It travels unobstructed for miles, gathering speed and stripping heat from anything it touches. Winter journals from the 19th century repeatedly described temperatures that seemed survivable until the wind arrived, turning manageable cold into something lethal within minutes. Settlers did not use the phrase wind chill, but they understood its effects intimately. You brace yourself and move with care. Walking into the wind feels like pushing against an invisible wall. Every step requires more effort. Your breath shortens not from exertion alone, but because inhaling too deeply burns. Exposed skin stings, then dulls, then disappears into numbness. This progression is familiar enough to be alarming. The sound of wind is constant. It does not roar so much as hiss, slipping around corners, under doors, through cracks you thought you sealed. Inside a home it whistles softly, a high thin note that keeps you half awake at night. People learn to identify new sounds quickly. A new whistle meant a new gap, and a new gap meant lost heat. Settlements were often built with wind in mind, though not always successfully. Homes clustered together, barns placed upwind fences angled to break gusts. Snow fences, simple slatted structures, were used to force drifting snow to settle away from paths and doors. This practice, still used today, was common knowledge by the late 1800s, learned through observation rather than formal design. You notice how snow behaves differently in wind. It does not fall. It skims, racing along the ground like living things piling unpredictably. Paths disappear, landmarks blur. During storms, people sometimes tied ropes between buildings so they could find their way back. Several frontier accounts mention individuals becoming disoriented just steps from their own doors, claimed by wind-driven snow that erased direction and sound. Animals react first, horses turn broadside, lowering skids. Cattle bunch together, forming living windbreaks. You watch them and adjust your own stance, copying their instinct. Indigenous winter practices often emphasize reading animal behavior as early warning, a lesson settlers adopted quickly when they learned how unforgiving the wind could be. There is an old belief that leaning into wind keeps you warmer. In truth, it only shortens exposure. Moving with the wind, angling your body, reducing surface area, these strategies develop naturally over time. No one teaches them formally. You learn by feeling how quickly heat leaves your face and hands. Some people wrap cloth around their noses and mouths, not just for warmth, but to slow breathing, preventing lungs from seizing. Others smear animal fat on exposed skin, creating a crude barrier against wind. Diaries mention this practice with mixed reviews. It helped some, others found it froze into a stiff mask. Later analysis offers no clear conclusion, but the attempt itself speaks to desperation and creativity. You reach shelter again, heart beating harder than expected. Wind drains energy quietly. You shake snow from your clothes, noticing how it melts and refreezes instantly. Inside, the air feels still, even if cold. The absence of wind is relief enough. At night, you hear it outside working the walls, testing the roof. Wind shapes sleep patterns. Sudden gusts wake you. Long, steady blows lull you into uneasy rest. There is ongoing disagreement among researchers about whether constant wind exposure contributed to the psychological strain of frontier winters, but anyone who lived through it would not need convincing. You sit by the fire and feel warmth return slowly, unevenly. Your face tingles as circulation resumes. The wind has moved on for now, but you know it will return. It always does. In the Old West, cold was a condition. Wind was a force multiplier. Together they dictated where you walked, how you built when you travelled, and when you stayed put. You listen as it fades into the distance, grateful for the brief stillness, knowing that winter rarely stays quiet for long. You consider travelling and immediately feel the weight of the decision. Distance behaves differently in winter. What looks close on a clear day can stretch into danger once cold settles in. You stand at the edge of the path, boots pressed into snow hardened like stone, and you listen. The land feels quiet, but not calm. Winter has a way of disguising risk as stillness. Trails exist, technically. Wagon ruts frozen into place faint lines where others have passed. But snow fills them quickly, wind smooths them over, and landmarks vanish under white sameness. People navigating the Old West in winter relied heavily on memory. You remember where the creek bends, where the fence line ends, where the land dips slightly. Lose that mental map and you are wandering. Letters written during severe winters describe travel reduced to necessity only. Mail routes were suspended, trade slowed, visits postponed indefinitely. When travel happened, it was deliberate and tense. You do not stroll, you commit. You dress-eat plan and then step out knowing there is no quick retreat if something goes wrong. Horses suffer too. Cold stiffens their joints and snow hides hazards. Ice cuts hooves. Some travellers wrapped cloth or leather around horses' legs for protection, though it slowed them. Others chose oxen slower but steadier. Records from the period note that oxen were preferred in extreme cold because they tolerated hardship better, even if they tested patience. You move carefully, each step measured. Breathing forms a steady rhythm, not too fast, not too deep. Sweat is the enemy again. You open your coat slightly, letting heat escape before it turns dangerous. This constant adjustment becomes instinctive. You barely notice yourself doing it. Wind shifts and erases your tracks behind you. That is unsettling. You glance back, reassured by the faint outline of the settlement, but you know how quickly it can disappear. Snow reflects light, oddly flattening the landscape. Depth perception falters. Hills look closer. Hollows vanish. People misjudge distances constantly in winter, a fact repeated in rescue accounts where searchers found bodies far closer to safety than expected. You pass a marker, maybe a tree or a post, and mentally log it. On the return trip, it will matter. Travellers often left small signs, broken branches, stones stacked deliberately to guide themselves back. These were fragile signals, easily lost, but better than nothing. There is an odd calm that comes with winter travel. Sound is muffled. Snow absorbs noise. Your own movements feel loud in contrast. The crunch of boots, the creak of leather, the snort of an animal. You become acutely aware of yourself as a moving thing in a frozen world. Some people travelled in pairs or groups, even if it slowed them. Companionship meant shared warmth during stops and a second set of eyes for trouble. There are accounts of travellers saving one another simply by talking, keeping minds alert when cold threatened to dull awareness. Others preferred solitude, believing it conserved energy. Modern interpretation remains unsettled on which approach reduced risk more effectively. You stop briefly, not long enough to cool. Standing still invites cold to settle into muscles. Movement is warmth. You check your fingers, press them together, feel sensation. Numbness is not panic yet, but it is a warning. You flex slowly, encouraging blood to return. Storms can appear without drama. A light wind strengthens, snow begins to drift. The horizon blurs. You have minutes, sometimes seconds, to decide whether to continue or turn back. People misjudge this constantly. Pride, urgency, or simple miscalculation led many to press on when they should not have. Winter punished hesitation and overconfidence equally. You reach your destination at last, relief washing over you quietly. No celebration, just the easing of tension. You stamp snow from your boots, step inside, and let the still air wrap around you. Travel ends the same way. It begins with warmth reclaimed slowly. As you prepare for the return, you think about how winter reshapes space. Miles stretch, hours thicken. Every journey becomes a test not of strength, but of judgment. In the Old West, surviving minus temperatures often depended less on daring and more on knowing when not to move. You rest briefly, then rise again. The path waits altered already by wind and cold. You pull your coat tight, steady your breath, and step back into it, carrying the quiet knowledge that in winter travel is never routine. It is always a negotiation with forces that do not care how badly you want to arrive. You watch the animals long before you look at the sky. Out here they notice winter shifts faster than people ever could. Their movements change subtly, not in panic but in preparation. A horse shifts its weight, turning its flank toward the wind. Cattle draw closer together, forming a slow breathing wall of warmth. Even birds alter their silence, appearing only when the cold eases slightly. Livestock are not just property, they are indicators. By the time settlers moved west, it was already understood that animals often sensed weather changes hours before humans did. You trust that knowledge now. When the chickens refuse to leave the coop, you delay your plans. When the dog circles twice more than usual before lying down, you take note. Animals also provide lessons in efficiency. You notice how they conserve movement, how they stand still rather than pacing, how they lower their heads to reduce exposure. These are not conscious strategies, but you borrow them anyway. Standing broadside to the wind like cattle actually reduces heat loss, a fact learned through watching rather than measurement. You move through the barn, the air thick with the smell of hay and animals. It is warmer here, noticeably so. Many families shelter animals close to living spaces in winter, sometimes directly beneath sleeping quarters. The heat rises. It helps. This arrangement appears repeatedly in homestead descriptions, not out of sentiment but necessity. There is an unusual practice you hear about from a neighbouring settlement. Someone brings newborn calves into the house during extreme cold, keeping them near the hearth at night. It sounds impractical, even ridiculous, until you remember that losing a calf in winter can mean losing an entire year's income. Desperation reshapes boundaries. Animals suffer in winter too. Frostbite claimed ears, tails, hooves, feed freezes, water turns solid. You break ice repeatedly throughout the day, your hands aching each time. Animals drink less when water is too cold, which weakens them. Some people warm water slightly before offering it an extra chore that pays off in survival. There is disagreement among later readers of frontier accounts about how much settlers truly understood animal physiology versus simply reacting to visible distress. But the results mattered more than the theory. Those who adapted their care saw better outcomes. Wild animals teach different lessons. You notice tracks near the settlement, neat lines pressed into snow. Deer move at dawn and owl at dusk. Wolves follow quietly, rabbits stay hidden. Trappers observe how fur thickens, how animals choose sheltered routes and they adjust their own paths accordingly. Clothing designs mimic what works in nature, fur direction, layering coverage. You listen at night. Animals make noise before storms. Horses snort, dogs whine, livestock grow restless. These sounds wake you faster than wind ever could. They are warnings without words. There is a strange comfort in sharing winter with animals. Their presence reminds you that survival is not uniquely human. It is collective. You feed them first, sometimes knowing that their strength supports yours. A horse that collapses from cold is a danger to itself and to you. As the day ends, you settle into routine. Check feed, break ice, secure doors. Animals settle, their breathing slow and steady. You take one last look before turning in, reassured by their quiet. In the Old West, winter survival often meant paying close attention to the non-human world. Animals were not background, they were teachers' companions, and sometimes the difference between enduring and failing. You carry that awareness back inside, leaving the barn warmer than you found it, knowing that tomorrow you will watch them again, because in winter they usually know first. You listen more closely now, not just to the wind or animals, but to people who have been here longer than you. Long before cabins dotted the land, winter ruled these plains and mountains, and survival knowledge accumulated slowly, carefully across generations. You begin to understand that much of what works best in this cold did not originate with settlers at all. Indigenous communities developed winter strategies shaped by intimate knowledge of land and climate. Clothing made from layered hides, fur turned inward trapped warmth efficiently. Snowshoes spread weight across drifts, preventing exhaustion and injury. These tools were not novelties, they were necessities refined over centuries. When settlers adopted them, survival rates improved noticeably, a pattern visible in migration records and winter casualty reports. You notice how indigenous winter shelters differ. Some are low and rounded, designed to shed wind. Others are partially buried using earth as insulation. Fires are smaller but constant. Smoke escapes through controlled openings. Every element serves a purpose. Nothing is decorative. Food practices matter too. Drying, smoking, and fermenting preserve nutrients through winter. Animal fat is used deliberately, not just for calories, but for insulation and energy. You hear of soups thick with marrow eaten slowly to sustain warmth over hours. These methods influence settler diets, though not always fully understood. There is a story shared quietly about people learning to travel by reading snow, understanding its layers, hardness, and sound. Snow is not uniform. It tells you where it will hold and where it will break. This knowledge saves lives. Those who ignored it fell through ice or exhausted themselves fighting drifts that could have been avoided. Not everyone listened. Pride, prejudice, and language barriers interfered. Some settlers dismissed indigenous advice as superstition, only to adopt the same practices later out of necessity. The written record shows a slow shift from skepticism to reliance, though the reasons behind that shift remain interpreted differently by modern scholars. You reflect on how knowledge moves in winter, quietly, without ceremony. It passes through observation, imitation, and survival, not formal teaching. You copy what works because you feel the difference immediately. Warmer feet, easier travel, less full fear. There is an unexpected calm in these methods. Movements are slower, fires smaller, energy conserved. Winter becomes something you move through rather than fight. That perspective changes everything. At Shnai, you recall someone explaining how snow itself can be shelter. A drift shaped carefully can block wind. A hollow dug properly traps heat. This sounds implausible until you feel how still the air is inside packed snow. Accounts from both indigenous and settler experiences describe temporary snow shelters, saving travellers caught far from home. Some later historians question how widely such knowledge was shared or adopted, noting that many settlers continue to die despite available techniques. Others argue that adaptation took time and winter allowed little room for learning curves. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. You sit by the fire thinking about how much of survival is humility, accepting that someone else knows better, watching instead of insisting. Winter has a way of stripping arrogance quickly. As you prepare for sleep, you adjust your bedding the way you were shown. Layers beneath as well as above. Small changes, big effects. You feel warmer already. Outside, the cold remains absolute. Inside, you carry forward techniques older than the cabin itself. The Old West winter is not conquered by invention alone. It is endured through borrowed wisdom adapted carefully night after night by those willing to learn from the land and the people who knew it first. You begin to notice how quiet winter really is. Not peaceful quiet, but a heavy stillness that presses inward. Once the chores are done and the fire is banked, there is very little to do but listen, and wait. Isolation settles in alongside the cold, subtle at first, then persistent. Distances that felt manageable in summer now stretch into separation. Neighbours you once saw weekly might go months without a visit. Snowdrifts block paths. Wind discourages travel. Even short trips feel risky. Journals from frontier families often mention counting days without outside contact during winter, not dramatically, just as a fact of life. Inside the cabin, sound changes. The walls absorb it. Voices feel louder than they should, then suddenly too quiet. You lower your tone without thinking. Conversation becomes slower, more deliberate. There is no hurry. Winter removes urgency from anything that is not survival. You sit with your thoughts longer than you're used to. Darkness arrives early and lingers. Lamps burn low to save fuel. Shadows stretch and settle. Some people read if they have books. Others mend endlessly, stitching the same seams over and over. Hands need something to do to keep the mind from wandering too far. Loneliness is not discussed openly. There is no word for seasonal sadness, yet no framework for understanding how the lack of light and movement affects the mind. People describe feeling low-spirited, restless, or heavy. Some write of dreams growing more vivid nights longer than they should be. Later interpretations differ on whether winter isolation intensified emotional strain or whether frontier life already demanded such mental endurance that it barely registered. Children feel it too. Play movies indoors, quieter, constrained. Arguments flare more easily. Adults intervene gently, aware that tempers shorten when space and light disappear. Stories become tools. You tell the same ones repeatedly, not because they're exciting, but because familiarity soothes. There is comfort in routine. You wake, tend the fire, eat, work, rest. The predictability becomes a kind of anchor. Without it, days blur together. Some people mark time by small events: repaired boot, a completed quilt square, a jar emptied. Progress is measured in inches. You listen to the wind at night, the only voice beyond your own. It fills the silence when conversation fades. Sometimes it lulls you. Sometimes it unsettles you. Sleep comes in pieces. You wake often checking the fire, listening for changes. This broken rest becomes normal. There are moments of connection that feel amplified by scarcity. A shared laugh warms more than it should. A touch lingers. Winter sharpens emotion by stripping away distraction. Everything feels closer, heavier, more immediate. Some accounts mention people talking to animals not playfully, but seriously filling the quiet with sound. Others describe singing, softly humming without realizing it. Sound becomes reassurance. Silence is something you manage, not enjoy. As the night deepens, you settle into stillness. The fire murmurs, the cabin creaks, your breathing slows. Isolation does not disappear, but it softens when accepted. You stop fighting the quiet and let it exist. Outside, the world remains frozen and distant. Inside, you hold warmth, routine, and presence. Winter teaches patience in ways no other season can. You close your eyes knowing that morning will come slowly, and that surviving the silence is as much a skill as surviving the cold. You notice illness differently in winter. It does not arrive suddenly with alarms or urgency. It seeps in quietly, often mistaken for tiredness or cold that lingers too long. A cough that does not leave. Fingers that stay numb longer than usual. A heaviness in the chest that makes each breath feel slightly delayed. In the Old West, sickness and the winter were tightly braided together, hard to separate. Cold changes how the body behaves. Muscles stiffen, circulation slows, small injuries heal poorly. People understood this through experience, not anatomy. They spoke of being worn down by the season of the cold settling inside them. Pneumonia was common, though rarely named as such. It was called winter fever lung sickness, or simply the chill. Once it took hold, recovery was uncertain. You learn quickly that frostbite is not dramatic at first. Skin pales, then turns waxy, sensation fading, as if someone turned down a dial. Pain comes later when warmth returns. Fingers swell, skin blisters. In severe cases, tissue darkens and hardens. People avoid looking too closely. Treatment varies. Some warm affected areas slowly. Others rub them, believing friction restores life. Outcomes differ, and the reasoning behind them remains tangled in hindsight. Medical care is limited. Doctors are few and winter travel makes reaching them dangerous. Most care happens at home, guided by the memory and shared advice. Poultices made from herbs, warm compresses, rest near the fire. Some remedies help, others do nothing. A few make things worse, yet trying feels better than waiting. You notice how illness spreads indoors. Windows stay shut. Smoke hangs heavy. Several people breathe the same air night after night. Coughs echo softly. Children fall ill first, then recover quickly or not at all. Adults linger in between, neither fully sick nor well. There is no isolation room, no spare space. Care and exposure happen simultaneously. One unusual practice involved placing hot bricks or stones wrapped in cloth against the chest of someone struggling to breathe, hoping warmth would loosen whatever gripped the lungs. Some reported relief, others reported nothing. These methods appear repeatedly in winter letters, suggesting that they were common enough to feel reliable even if results varied. Food becomes medicine. Broth replaces solid meals. Fat is added, deliberately believed to strengthen the body. Water is warmed. Alcohol is debated endlessly. Some swear it revives the sick. Others notice decline afterward. Experience teaches caution, though belief often lags behind observation. There is quiet fear around illness in winter because escape routes vanish. In summer you might seek help elsewhere. In winter you wait. That waiting shapes behavior. People rest more than they want to. Work slows. Tasks are redistributed. Survival becomes collective again. Illness turning one person into many responsibilities. Later interpretations differ on how much winter illness was driven by cold exposure versus smoke inhalation and poor ventilation. Cabins built to trap heat also trapped irritants. Eyes burned. Lungs worked harder. The trade-off was accepted without complaint because warmth mattered more immediately than long-term health. You feel your own body constantly scanning for signs. Is that ache normal fatigue or something else? Is that cough from smoke or something deeper? This awareness never fully relaxes. Winter makes everyone a quiet observer of themselves. Despite the risk, many recover. Bodies adapt. Immune systems strengthen or fail. Survival leaves no middle ground. Those who endure one winter often endure the next with more confidence, more caution. As night settles, you check on those resting nearby. Breathing is steady. Colour looks better. Relief arrives softly, not celebrated. You return to your place by the fire, listening to its low murmur. Outside, the cold holds firm. Inside, care continues improvised and imperfect. In the Old West, winter illness was not always an emergency. Often it was a long negotiation between body environment and patients. You settle back, aware that tomorrow will bring more, watching, more listening, and hopefully more quiet signs of recovery. You notice winter through the children first. Adults talk less about how cold it feels, but children show it in small, honest ways. Fingers tucked into sleeves, feet drawn up under them when they sit. Movements that slow not from laziness but from calculation. They learn quickly that winter has rules. Mornings begin with layers added patiently, one child at a time. Clothing is handed down patched, let out taken in again. Nothing fits perfectly, it only needs to be enough. You help button stiff coats, fingers clumsy in the cold, while children stand still because moving makes the process longer. Complaints are brief. Cold teaches efficiency early. Schooling continues when it can. Sometimes lessons happen at the kitchen table, sometimes not at all. Ink freezes. Fingers cramp around chalk. Reading aloud replaces writing. When weather worsens, education pauses without apology. Survival outranks schedules. This rhythm appears often in family journals winter, marking a clear boundary between what is ideal and what is possible. Children work in winter too, though tasks shift. They carry kindling, fetch snow to melt, mind younger siblings near the fire. Outdoor chores are shorter, carefully timed. Adults watch closely for signs of trouble. Pale cheeks that do not flush. Quiet that lasts too long. Cold, dull sensation, and children do not always recognize danger until it has already arrived. Play does not disappear. It changes shape. Snow becomes material rather than environment. Packed into walls, tunnel, heaps. Laughter carries farther and cold air are sharp and bright. These moments feel precious, short. Adults pause to listen, letting it warm something deeper than skin. Illness worries parents most. Children recover quickly or decline suddenly. There is little middle ground. When one grows quiet, everyone notices. Beds are rearranged so the sick sleep closer to warmth. Stories are told softly, not to entertain, but to keep spirits anchored. Attention becomes medicine. There is an odd practice mentioned in several households of the time. Children are sometimes made to sleep wearing hats even indoors, believed to prevent nighttime chills from settling into the head. Whether this helped physically is unclear, but the routine itself brought reassurance. Reassurance matters in winter. Discipline softens during cold months. Energy is limited. Patience stretches thin. Adults choose their battles carefully. A child lingering by the fire is not scolded. Hunger is met quickly. Winter shifts priorities in subtle ways, loosening rules that matter less when conditions are harsh. You watch how children adapt faster than expected. They learn where to sit to avoid drafts. They recognize the sound of wind that means stay inside. They copy adults opening coats to vent heat, tightening scarves before stepping out. These habits settle in quietly, becoming instinct before spring arrives. There is later disagreement among those who study frontier life about whether children suffered more or less in winter compared to adults. Some point to vulnerability. Others note resilience. The records suggest both depending on care, nutrition, and sheer luck. Winter does not discriminate, but it does magnify differences. At night, children sleep deeply, when warm enough, exhaustion overtaking restlessness. When cold, they stir often. Adults wake at every sound, listening for breathing patterns, adjusting blankets, feeding the fire. Sleep becomes a shared responsibility. You sit back and watch them now, faces softened by firelight, eyelashes catching the glow. Winter shapes them early. It teaches caution, cooperation, awareness. It leaves marks that are not always visible. Outside, the cold remains relentless. Inside, children grow, adapt, endure. In the Old West, winter did not pause childhood, but it did redefine it. You feel that weight as you tend the fire once more, knowing that every small comfort you manage to preserve matters more to them than they will ever fully understand. You begin to notice how winter work settles most heavily into quiet hands. While the cold touches everyone, the work of holding warmth together often happens indoors, steadily, without pause. The rhythm of it is constant. Stoking the fire, mending clothes, preparing food that takes hours instead of minutes. Winter turns domestic space into an engine room, and someone has to keep it running. Women in frontier homes often carry this burden not by design but by necessity. Letters from the period describe days filled with motion that never quite shows results. A meal eaten disappears, a fire fed demands more fuel, a shirt mended will tear again. The work loops endlessly, especially in winter when stopping is not an option. You sit nearby and listen to the sound of stitching needle passing through thick fabric with a soft pull. Wool, leather, hide all resist slightly. Fingers move carefully, skin dry and cracked despite constant care. Fat or oil rubbed in at night helps, but the cold steals moisture relentlessly. Hands ache, but they keep moving. Warmth is managed through planning. Blankets are layered deliberately. Bedding is aired near the fire during the day to drive out dampness. Clothing is rotated so nothing stays wet too long. You learn that heat is not just produced, it is preserved. Small decisions accumulate into survival. Cooking in winter is slower, heavier. Dough rises reluctantly, water takes forever to heat, meals are timed to the fire's strength. Someone always keeps watch, adjusting pots, shifting coals. This attention never relaxes. Distraction costs heat, food, or both. There is a quiet knowledge passed between women about how to stretch resources, how to reuse water, how to combine scraps into something filling, how to judge whether a child is cold or just tired. This knowledge is rarely written down. It moves through observation and repetition, refined each winter. An unusual detail surfaces in some household accounts. Women sometimes slept closest to the door or wall, positioning themselves as buffers against drafts so children could rest warmer. Whether this made a measurable difference is unclear, but the intention is unmistakable. Warmth is shared strategically. There is discussion among later interpreters about whether winter domestic labour was recognised as essential work or taken for granted. The writings themselves suggest little reflection on the question at the time. Survival did not leave room for commentary. Work was done because it had to be. You notice how conversation flows during these tasks. Stories told softly, advice exchanged casually, laughter appears unexpectedly. Winter compresses space, forcing closeness. Tension flares, then fades. Cooperation becomes survival skill as much as any tool. At night, when others sleep, someone often wakes to tend the fire or check a child's breathing. This vigilance blends into exhaustion. Yet mornings still begin the same way, with hands reaching for kindling fabric tools. You feel the steadiness of it all. Winter survival here is not dramatic heroism. It is persistence. It is the quiet insistence that warmth will be maintained, meals will appear, and bodies will be protected as best as possible. Outside, the cold presses against the walls indifferent. Inside, warmth is held together through countless small acts that rarely earn mention but make everything else possible. In the Old West, winter did not survive people. People survived winter often because someone kept the fire fed, the clothes mended, and the household moving forward without ever calling attention to the effort. You settle back, listening to the soft scrape of a needle, the murmur of fire, and the steady work that keeps the night at bay. You step back into work because stopping is not an option. Winter does not pause the needs of the land. Animals still require feed, equipment still breaks, food still has to be processed. The cold reshapes labour, but it does not erase it. If anything, it makes every task heavier. Your movements slow not from weakness but intention. Sudden effort wastes energy and invites sweat. Sweat invites danger, so work becomes measured. Lift, pause, breathe, continue. This rhythm carries you through hours that feel both long and strangely compressed. Fields lie dormant under snow, but barns stay busy. Hay must be moved carefully, flakes separating reluctantly in the cold. Tools sting the hands even through gloves. Metal steals heat instantly. You learn to grip wood when you can to avoid bare contact at all costs. Outdoor work is broken into short bursts. You step out, complete one task, return, inside to warm. This back and forth becomes routine. Doors open and close constantly. Heat escapes. Cold follows. You accept the loss because the alternative is injury. There are moments when you consider skipping a task, leaving it for tomorrow. Winter punishes that thinking quickly. A frozen water trough can kill livestock overnight. A loose board becomes a drifted doorway by morning. Preventive work saves lives, human and animal alike. Someone once mentions how in particularly harsh winters, people altered work schedules entirely rising before dawn to take advantage of calmer winds, then retreating during the worst cold. This flexibility appears in several accounts suggesting that rigid routines softened when survival demanded it. You feel exhaustion settle deeper in winter. Sleep never quite restores. Bodies burn more energy just staying warm. Meals grow heavier. Muscles ache constantly. Still work continues. There is no romantic grit here, just necessity. Tools suffer too. Wood handles crack, iron becomes brittle, repairs happen indoors when possible. Improvisation is constant. A broken shovel becomes a scraper. A cracked barrel is bound with rope and hope. You work alongside others silently most of the time. Talking wastes breath. Breathing too deeply burns. Communication shrinks to gestures and glances. Cooperation becomes efficient wordless. There is quiet pride in finishing a task before cold overwhelms you. You return inside stamping snow from boots, feeling warmth creep back slowly. Hands tingle, muscles relax, relief arrives without ceremony. Some people claim winter work hardened them permanently, that they emerge stronger each spring. Others quietly admit it wore them down year by year. The truth likely varied by body age and luck. Winter does not treat everyone equally. As evening approaches, chores slow. You prepare for night knowing tomorrow will demand the same effort. The work never truly ends. It only changes shape. You sit near the fire now, letting your body rest. Outside, the land lies frozen and still. Inside, tools lean against walls waiting. Winter has not stopped work. It has simply made it more deliberate, more costly and more essential. You breathe deeply, feeling fatigue and warmth coexist. This is winter labour in the Old West, not heroic, not optional. Just the steady act of doing what must be done again and again until spring decides to return. You realise that winter death rarely announces itself. It does not always arrive with storms or dramatic last moments. More often it slips in quietly unnoticed until it is too late. Someone does not wake. Someone sits down to rest and never stands again. Cold claims without spectacle, and that makes it harder to talk about. In the Old West, death in winter was treated with a practical calm that feels unsettling now. There were no hospitals nearby, no rapid help. When someone passed, especially during deep cold, the response was measured. Grief existed, but survival demanded composure. The living still needed warmth, food, and care. Bodies freeze quickly. The ground becomes too hard to dig. Burial is often delayed until spring, a reality mentioned plainly in family records with little embellishment. Temporary storage happens in shed cellars, or even outside where cold preserves what life has left. This was not considered disrespectful. It was necessity. You notice how people avoid discussing the cold as cause. They speak instead of weakness, illness, or misfortune. Cold is treated as background ever-present, almost impersonal. Naming it directly feels pointless. It is like blaming the sky. Accidents increase in winter. Slips on ice, falls from roofs while clearing snow, burns from fires tended too closely. Each risk compounds when cold slows reaction time and dulls sensation. Pain signals arrive late. Damage is already done. There is a strange detail that appears in some accounts. People sometimes kept the fire burning continuously after a death, believing it discouraged further loss. Whether this was superstition or an instinctive response to fear is unclear. Warmth becomes symbolic as well as practical. Community response matters. Neighbours step in quietly, completing chores without asking. Food appears, fires are tended. The structure of daily life absorbs loss, preventing collapse. Winter does not allow long pauses for mourning. Later readers of these accounts do not agree on how emotionally numb people became in such conditions. Some see evidence of resilience. Others see suppression born of necessity. The truth shifts from household to household. You feel the weight of it now, when winter strips drama from death. There is no room for ceremony when survival continues pressing forward, and yet remembrance persists in small ways. A chair left untouched, a tool kept by the door, silence where a voice used to be. As night falls, you sit by the fire, aware of how thin the line remains. Cold waits for distraction, for fatigue, for mistakes. Life continues because attention continues. In the Old West, winter death was not rare, but it was rarely sensational. It arrived quietly and was carried quietly by those left behind. You breathe steadily, feeling the fire's warmth, understanding that survival is not just staying alive, but staying alert. You notice how people talk to winter when it refuses to listen. Not out loud, not exactly, but through habits, rituals, and beliefs that sit somewhere between hope and habit. When the cold stretches on longer than expected, when storms arrive one after another, people look for meaning wherever they can. Faith becomes practical in winter. Prayers are shorter, more frequent, not always formal. Sometimes it is a whispered request before stepping outside or a quiet thanks when the fire catches easily. Churches, when reachable, fill more quickly during cold months. If they are not reachable, belief travels home, settling near the hearth. Weather signs are watched closely. A red sunrise, a halo around the moon. The way smoke rises straight or bends sharply. These signs are discussed with seriousness, not as entertainment, but as guidance. Some are reliable, others are coincidence. All are considered. You hear stories passed along by firelight, tales of winters so cold birds froze mid-flight, of storms that buried fences and erased roads. Whether exaggerated or not, these stories serve a purpose. They remind listeners that others endured worse and survived. Perspective becomes a tool. There are small rituals meant to protect the household. Doors closed a certain way. Fires banked carefully before sleep. Tools placed deliberately near the entrance. These actions feel reassuring, even if their impact is more emotional than physical. Emotional steadiness matters when isolation presses in. One household insists on never whistling indoors during winter, believing it invites wind. Another avoids speaking of storms aloud, fearing it draws them closer. These customs vary widely, but their presence is consistent. Winter encourages superstition not because people are foolish, but because uncertainty leaves space that logic cannot always fill. Songs appear more often in winter evenings. Quiet ones, familiar ones. Singing warms breath, fills silence, and anchors attention. Hymns blend into folk tunes. The line between sacred and secular softens when warmth and comfort are the goal. There is no single agreement among later observers about how deeply belief shaped winter survival. Some argue it offered structure and resilience. Others suggest it provided comfort without practical benefit. What is clear is that belief filled gaps when information and control were limited. You sit and listen, letting stories flow around you. Faces glow in firelight. Shadows stretch and retreat. For a moment, the cold outside feels distant, held at bay by shared attention. Winter in the Old West was not only endured with tools and planning, it was endured with meaning, with rituals that steadied hands, with stories that carried people through long nights. You rest into that quiet now, letting belief, however loosely held, soften the edges of another cold evening. You hear people argue about clothing more in winter than at any other time. Not loudly, not angrily, but persistently. What keeps you warm? What makes you sick? What works only because someone believes it does? These conversations repeat themselves every year, shifting slightly as experience accumulates. Some swear by fur worn with the hair inward, claiming it traps warmth close to the skin. Others insist hair outward sheds snow better and stays drier. You try both over time. You notice differences, but not certainty. Conditions change. Bodies change. What saves you one winter might fail you the next. Scarves become points of contention. Wrap too tightly and breathing becomes difficult. Leave too loose and cold slips in. People experiment, constantly adjusting knots and folds until something feels right. These choices feel minor until a wrong one leaves your throat aching for days. Boots inspire endless commentary. Thick soles keep cold ground at bay but make walking harder. Thin soles flex better but chill faster. Some stuff boots with straw. Others use felted wool liners. One man insists newspaper is best because it traps air. You try it once. It works until it gets wet, then it becomes a mistake you feel with every step. There is a belief that exposing yourself to cold builds strength. Some follow it religiously, standing outside bareheaded for short periods, claiming it hardens the body. Others shake their heads and keep hats pulled low. You watch outcomes over years. The results do not line up neatly with belief. Another winter habit circulates quietly. People rub alcohol on their skin, believing it warms the surface. It tingles, feels warm briefly, then leaves skin colder than before. Some abandon the practice. Others continue convinced the warmth matters more than the after effect. Layering becomes less about rules and more about listening. You learn when to vent heat, when to seal everything tight. Clothing is no longer passive. It becomes a system you adjust constantly. You notice how myths persist even when evidence contradicts them. Comfort plays a role. Ritual plays a role. Winter is long and certainty is rare. People cling to what feels protective even if results are mixed. There is no final authority, no manual that settles the arguments. Experience accumulates slowly, unvenally. What works in dry cold fails in damp cold. What works while moving fails while resting. The environment refuses to be consistent. As evening settles, you adjust your own layers again. Loosen a scarf, tighten a cuff, add a blanket. These small decisions feel intimate, personal. Clothing becomes a conversation between body and weather. In the Old West, winter clothing was never perfected. It was negotiated daily. Myths faded or survived not because they were true or false, but because winter allowed little time for certainty. You sit by the fire now warm enough, listening to others continue the same debates, knowing they will begin again tomorrow, shaped by cold memory and the need to believe that something somewhere can make winter easier. You learn to respect blizzards long before you understand them. They do not always arrive with drama. Sometimes the day begins calm, almost gentle, the sky pale and still. That is often the warning. Snow follows slowly at first light, flakes drifting sideways, then the wind strengthens and the world begins to disappear. When blizzards come, they erase edges. Roads vanish, fence lines dissolve. Familiar shapes blur until distance becomes guesswork. People once measured direction by landmarks. In storms like this, landmarks simply stop existing. You turn your head and see nothing but white movement, a curtain pulled across the land. Sound behaves strangely. Wind roars close to your ears, yet everything beyond a few feet goes silent. Voices vanish quickly. Bells and calls lose meaning. Several winter accounts mention people shouting to companions only steps away, never hearing a reply. Panic does not arrive immediately. Confusion comes first. You retreat indoors early when you can. Doors are reinforced, shutters secured, snow is cleared repeatedly to prevent it from sealing entrances shut. This work continues until exhaustion wins or the storm eases. Letting snow pile too high risks trapping everyone inside, sometimes for days. Inside light dims as snow presses against windows. Even during daylight, lamps are lit. Time becomes slippery. Meals blur together. Sleep happens in short stretches. Fires demand constant attention as wind pulls heat relentlessly from walls and roofs. There are stories of storms lasting days without pause. Livestock lost where they stood, buried by drifting snow. Entire herds gone by thin morning. These losses reshape lives quickly. Without animals, spring plans collapse. Blizzards do not just threaten life in the moment, they rearrange the future. You hear of people caught outside when storms hit suddenly. Some tried to follow fences by touch one hand sliding along wire until it led them home or nowhere. Others tied ropes between buildings as lifelines. A few survived by digging into drifts, creating pockets of still air until wind passed. Not everyone guessed right. After storms, the land looks unfamiliar. Drifts stack higher than fences. Paths must be dug out by hand. Neighbours search for one another, counting faces, assessing damage quietly. Relief mixes with loss. Blizzards change maps. Routes used for years become unusable. New paths form around drifts that never fully melt. Settlements shift slightly, adjusting to altered terrain. Winter leaves marks long after snow disappears. As the storm fades, silence returns heavier than before. Snow glows faintly under moonlight. The world feels newly made, stripped of detail. You step carefully, relearning the ground. In the Old West, blizzards were not rare interruptions. They were forces that reset routines, reshaped land, and reminded everyone how temporary their plans really were. You breathe slowly now, letting stillness settle, knowing that even when the sky clears, winter's work continues quietly beneath your feet. You notice how the bottle appears more often when the cold deepens. Not in celebration, not in excess at first, but as something to hold a sip to believe in. Alcohol carries a reputation in winter whispered about with confidence. It warms you. It helps you sleep. It keeps fear away. At least that is what people say. The first swallow feels convincing. Heat rushes outward, flushing cheeks, loosening stiff muscles. Laughter comes easier. The cold seems less sharp. This sensation makes the belief stick. You understand why it spreads so easily. Winter invites anything that promises relief. But you also notice patterns. Those who drink heavily in winter tend to suffer more cold injuries. They linger outside longer. They misjudge distances. They fall asleep too close to the fire or too far from it. Stories circulate quietly of people found frozen, not far from warmth, their judgment dulled rather than sharpened. Some households ban alcohol entirely during an extreme cold. Others ration it carefully, treating it like medicine rather than comfort. A small measure before bed. Never before travel. These rules are learned through experience, often painful. There is a strange contradiction in winter drinking. It makes you feel warmer while quietly increasing heat loss. Skin flushes. Blood moves outward. The core cools faster. People do not explain it this way, but they feel the consequences. Shivering arrives sooner. Fatigue deepens. You hear of remedies involving alcohol mixed with herbs warmed and taken slowly. Some claim it helps with coughs or chest tightness. Others notice no benefit. Still, the ritual persists. The act of warming, sipping, resting matters as much as the ingredients. Alcohol also alters sleep. It brings drowsiness, but sleep becomes shallow. People wake colder, disoriented, fire low. Those who avoid drinking notice more stable rest. This difference becomes part of winter knowledge shared cautiously without preaching. Social dynamics shift around the bottle. Tension eases. Conversation flows. Loneliness softens briefly. But winter amplifies consequences. A mistake made drunk in summer might bruise pride. In winter it can cost fingers or life. You sit by the fire holding a cup, weighing warmth against risk. You sip slowly, aware of the balance. Enough to ease stiffness, not enough to blur awareness. This careful approach spreads among those who survive multiple winters. As night deepens, the bottle is set aside. The fire takes over as the safer comfort. Outside, cold remains indifferent to belief or bravado. In the Old West, alcohol was neither villain nor saviour in winter. It was a tool powerful and double-edged. You learn to respect it the same way you respect fire and cold, cautiously, attentively aware that relief and danger often arrive together. You begin to realise that winter survival rarely happens alone. Even the most self-reliant homestead leans outward when the cold tightens its grip. You notice it in small ways at first. A knock at the door that is not a visit, just someone checking in. A shovel leaned where another family can borrow it. A pot of food passed quietly across the snow and returned clean. Neighbours become parts of your daily calculations. You think about who has wood, who has animals, who has children. Winter sharpens awareness of absence. If smoke does not rise from a chimney one morning, someone goes to look. Not later, now. Work is shared when possible. Snow clearing turns into group effort. One path connects several homes cut and maintained together. Fences are repaired cooperatively before storms, knowing that livestock wandering in winter risks more than inconvenience. These shared tasks build rhythm and trust without ceremony. There is an unspoken rule that pride softens in winter. Asking for help is not failure. Refusing it can be. This understanding appears again and again in how people behave. A family short on food receives extra without record. Another repays in spring or never. Balance is measured over years, not weeks. You hear of settlements forming winter agreements, informal promises to check on one another daily, to share fire if needed, to shelter travellers caught out unexpectedly. These arrangements are rarely written down, but they exist all the same, enforced by necessity rather than law. There's a story passed along about a man who survived only because neighbours broke into his cabin after noticing his fire had gone out. He was furious at first, then grateful. That reaction tells you everything you need to know about winter priorities. Children move between homes more freely in winter. They bring messages. They share warmth. They learn early who belongs to whom, not by blood, but by responsibility. This network grows stronger as conditions worsen. There is no illusion of equality. Some have more resources. Some struggle constantly. Winter does not erase these differences, but it does narrow them. Excess becomes burden when it cannot be defended or used alone. You notice how tone shifts when winter deepens. Arguments quiet. Old grudges lose urgency. Cooperation is not sentimental. It is practical. Cold leaves little room for pride. As evening falls, lights glow faintly across the settlement. You know where everyone is roughly. That knowledge itself feels like warmth. Inside you tend your own fire, but you also listen for others. In the Old West, winter survival often depended less on individual toughness than on collective awareness. You settle back, comforted by proximity, knowing that while cold surrounds you, connection threads quietly through it, holding everyone just warm enough to last another night. You hear the animals before you see them. A low shuffle, a breath clouding the air. In winter, boundaries between living spaces blur in ways that would feel strange at any other time. Doors open that normally stay shut. Pens empty into sheltered corners. Warmth rearranges priorities. Some nights, animals move closer to the house by choice. Cows press against outer walls drawn by residual heat. Chickens are brought inside, settling into crates near the hearth. The smell changes, earthy, alive. You notice it immediately, but you do not complain. Smell means warmth. People learn quickly that shared heat matters more than comfort. Barns are built close for this reason. Some cabins are designed with lean-to structures where animals shelter on one side, humans on the other, separated by little more than wood and packed soil. Heat seeps through slowly, constantly. You hear of families bringing lambs or piglets indoors during extreme cold, wrapping them in a cloth, feeding them by hand. It feels awkward at first, then normal. Loss in winter costs more than food. It costs spring. Animals shift their behavior indoors. They grow quieter, conserving energy. Their breathing becomes part of the soundscape at night, a steady rhythm beneath the crackle of fire. You wake and listen, reassured by it. Silence would be worse. Care becomes constant. Bedding is changed to keep animals dry. Water is warmed slightly so they will drink. Feed is rationed carefully. Winter punishes neglect faster than hunger ever could. There is debate among later readers of winter accounts about whether keeping animals so close increased illness or improved survival overall. The answer shifts by circumstance. Crowding brings risk. Cold brings certainty. Most choose the risk they can see. You notice how children treat animals differently in winter. Gentler, more attentive. They understand instinctively that warmth shared is warmth multiplied. A calf's breath on cold hands feels like a gift. At night, you lie still listening to wind outside and life inside. The house feels fuller, warmer. Not just in temperature, but presence. In the Old West, winter dissolved the neat separation between people and animals. Survival drew them together under one roof, breathing the same air, enduring the same cold. You settle deeper into your blankets, comforted by the closeness, knowing that shared warmth has carried many through nights far colder than this one. You wake in the night not because of cold, but because of sound. Winter makes noise in ways that feel unfamiliar at first. Wood contracts, sharply snapping like a knuckle cracked too hard. Ice shifts somewhere outside with a deep hollow groan. Even the house itself seems to speak, responding to temperature, the way a body responds to pain. You lie still and listen. The fire murmurs softly, a low, companionable sound. Beyond it, the wind moves around the walls, not violent tonight, just persistent. It slides along, the roof dips, near the door, then lifts away again. Each movement has a voice. Over time, you learn which ones matter. Snow makes its own language. When it falls lightly, it whispers, brushing against windows and walls like dry fingers. When it piles, it presses, adding, "Wait, you can feel through the floor." After storm, snow settles with a faint sigh, the sound of a world rearranging itself. There is a particular sound that signals danger. Silence. When wind stops suddenly in the middle of a stormy as ring, the absence feels heavy. People notice it instantly. That quiet often means the temperature is dropping fast. You pull blankets closer without thinking. Inside every small movement carries farther. A spoon set down too hard, a cough, a child shifting in sleep. Winter sharpens hearing by stripping away background noise. There are no insects, no leaves, no running water, just breath fire and the occasional complaint of the building. You hear animals too. A horse stamping once then still, chickens rustling in their crate. These sounds reassure you. They mean life continues. You count them without realizing you are doing it. Some people say they can hear cold itself. Not metaphorically, but literally. A high thin ringing in the ears during extreme freezes. Whether this comes from the air, the body, or imagination does not matter much. Enough people mention it that you recognize the sensation when it arrives. Night sounds stretch time. Minutes feel longer. You drift in and out of sleep, waking to check the fire to listen again. Sleep is lighter in winter, attentive by necessity. By morning, the house is quiet again. The sounds of night fade, replaced by the familiar crackle of embers and the distant call of wind. You sit up slowly, aware that listening has become part of survival. In the Old West, winter nights were never silent. They were filled with the subtle signals of cold at work. You lie back for a moment longer, letting the quiet sounds settle around you, knowing that paying attention is what keeps you here to hear them again tomorrow. You begin to understand that spring is not a promise. Winter teaches this lesson slowly, sometimes cruelly. Days grow a little longer, the sun lingers, just enough to raise hope, and then the cold returns, as if offended by your optimism. False thaws become their own test. Snow softens during the day, turning paths into slush, boots soak through. Water runs briefly, then freezes again overnight, locking doors and splitting containers. Mud appears and then hardens, uneven and treacherous. This back and forth wears on patience more than deep cold ever did. You feel the shift in your body. Energy lifts slightly with the light, then crashes when the temperature drops again. People grow restless. Plans resurface prematurely. Someone talks about planting. Another mentions travel. These conversations stop when the wind sharpens again. Animals respond first. Horses step carefully, confused by ground that cannot decide what it is. Livestock break through crusted snow and struggle. Feed runs lower than expected because winter stretched longer than planned. Calculations must be redone quietly. There is a saying passed around that winter tests you once, then tests you again when you think it is done. It feels accurate. You adjust routines, reluctantly returning to heavier clothing, stricter rationing, deeper vigilance. Snowmelt creates new problems. Roofs leak, walls weep moisture. Smoke thickens as damp air resists rising heat. You dry everything, constantly chasing moisture like another enemy. Some people believe the worst danger lies in these weeks. Complacency sets in. Attention drifts, bodies are tired. Cold injuries happen more often now than during the deepest freezes, when caution was absolute. You hear of someone losing livestock to a late storm after assuming winter had loosened its grip. Another family runs out of wood just before temperatures plunge again. These stories spread quickly, not as gossip, but as warnings. At night, you watch the fire closely. You no longer trust daylight as a guide. Light lies. Warmth must be proven. When true spring finally arrives, it does not announce itself loudly. It stays. Snow melts and does not return. Ground softens and remains soft. Birds appear and keep coming back, only then do shoulders relax. Until that moment you endure the long in-between. Winter's last test is patience. You learn not to hope too loudly, not to plan too firmly. Survival now depends on restraint. You sit by the fire once more, wrapped in layers you hope to store away. Outside the land hesitates. Inside you remain ready. In the Old West, many winters claim their final toll not at the beginning, but at the end when people thought they had already survived. You start to notice small changes creeping into winter life. Not dramatic inventions, just quiet adjustments that soften the edge a little. They arrive slowly, unevenly, and not everywhere at once. Someone has a better stove. Someone else lines a coat differently. Progress in winter never feels like progress. It feels like fewer mistakes. Iron stoves replace open hearths in some homes. They burn fuel more efficiently and hold heat longer, radiating warmth even after flames die down. They also introduce new risks. Pipes clog with soot. Poor draft fills rooms with smoke. Still, once people learn their habits, these stoves change nights. You wake less often to tend the fire. The house stays warmer, steadier. Windows improve slightly. Glass is still expensive and fragile, but when it appears, it alters winter light. Oil, paper, or cloth once covered openings, letting wind through despite good intentions. Glass blocks drafts, though it steals warmth if not covered. Curtains and shutters become tools opened and closed with care. Clothing changes too. Wool processing improves, felt becomes denser. Knitting patterns spread from place to place. Mittens fit better. Socks last longer. None of this feels revolutionary. It simply means fewer frozen toes. You hear of new methods for storing food that reduce spoilage. Better root cellars. Improved smoking techniques. Small changes that mean fewer desperate days at the end of winter. Planning stretches further into the cold months. Tools adapt. Handles are shaped to be used with gloves. Lanterns shield flames better from wind. Snowshoes spread weight more effectively. Each improvement saves energy, time, or injury. Winter notices these things immediately. Not everyone benefits at once. Distance slows change. Cost blocks access. Some settlements look much the same year after year. Others inch forward. This unevenness shapes who stays and who leaves. You reflect on how winter forces honesty. New tools either work or they do not. There is no room for novelty that fails in the cold. Practical knowledge spreads faster than ideas ever could. As evening falls, you sit near a stove that holds its heat longer than the fires you once knew. The warmth feels different, less urgent. You rest into it aware that winter has not weakened, but your relationship with it has shifted slightly. In the Old West, technology did not defeat cold, it negotiated with it. Each small advance brought time, sleep, and energy. You close your eyes, letting the steady warmth settle, knowing that survival is rarely about sudden breakthroughs. It is about accumulating enough small advantages to make another winter livable. You notice how stories change in winter. They slow down, they stretch. Details linger longer than they do in summer. When the fire burns low and the wind presses close, people begin to talk, not to entertain, but to anchor themselves. Stories become another layer against the cold. Someone starts with a memory, a winter worse than this one, a storm that lasted longer, a night when the fire nearly failed. Others add pieces correcting, gently filling gaps. Accuracy matters less than rhythm. The telling itself is the point. Children listen wide-eyed even when they have heard the story before. Familiar endings comfort them. Adults pretend they are bored, but they listen too. Repetition steadies the mind. Winter encourages it. You hear how survival stories turn into family currency. Passed down, refined, exaggerated slightly, but grounded in experience. These are not heroic tales. They focus on small decisions, turning back at the right moment, sharing food, staying awake when sleep tempted too strongly. There is laughter, sometimes soft and brief. Humour in winter is careful. Jokes land gently, avoiding edges that might cut too deeply. Someone mimics the sound of wind howling through a poorly sealed wall and everyone nods in recognition. Stories also teach without instructing. A child hears about someone losing fingers after removing gloves too long. No lecture follows. The lesson settles quietly. Winter knowledge spreads this way, absorbed rather than imposed. You notice how firelight shapes faces as stories unfold. Shadows deepen lines. Expressions soften. The cold outside feels farther away while voices fill the space. Some stories drift into speculation. What might have happened if someone chose differently? If help arrived sooner? These moments carry uncertainty without resolution. Winter allows questions to remain unanswered. As the night deepens, stories fade naturally. Silence returns, but it feels earned now, not heavy. The fire settles. Breathing slows. In the Old West, winter stories were not entertainment alone. They were memory, instruction, and comfort woven together. You lean back, letting the last words echo softly in your mind, warmed by voices that carried others through nights just like this one. You begin to sense how winter changes people in ways that last longer than the cold itself. It does not just test strength. It rearranges patience, expectations, and attention. By now you move differently. You plan further ahead. You waste less energy, less speech, less motion. Winter trains you without asking permission. Small irritations no longer matter. You let things slide because conserving emotion becomes as important as conserving heat. Anger warms briefly, then drains you. Calm lasts longer. You choose it more often, not out of virtue, but practicality. Time feels altered. Hours stretch during long nights. Days blur together. You stop counting them individually and start measuring by conditions instead. The day the wind eased, the night the fire held steady, the morning the water did not freeze completely. These moments replace calendars. You notice how people speak more plainly now. Words are chosen carefully. Explanations shorten. Promises are made cautious, so winter punishes exaggeration. You say only what you can sustain. Trust changes too. You trust those who show up repeatedly quietly, those who do what they say without comment. Winter reveals character through consistency rather than declarations. There is less tolerance for excess. Food is eaten with intention. Clothing is valued for function. Objects earn their place. What cannot justify its weight disappears by spring. You realize that surviving winter once changes how you face the next one. Fear does not vanish, but it sharpens into awareness. You recognize signs earlier. You act sooner. You rest before exhaustion forces you to. Some people leave after a hard winter. They decide this life asks too much. Others stay changed but committed. The cold sorts people without apology. As the season drags on, you feel both older and steadier. Winter has carved something into you. Not bitterness, not pride, something quieter. Endurance without drama. You sit by the fire listening to its steady sound. Outside the land remains frozen, but you feel less at odds with it now. Winter has shaped you into someone who fits it better, at least for this moment. In the Old West, cold did not just threaten survival, it refined it. You breathe slowly, letting that realization settle, knowing that whatever warmth you have earned tonight comes not only from fire and shelter, but from adaptation itself. You begin to notice the quiet conversations that surface as winter loosens its grip even slightly. They are not announced, not debated openly, just hinted at in pauses and glances. Should you stay or should you go? The question hangs in the air like breath on a cold morning. Some people talk about greener places, milder winters, land where cold does not dominate every decision. These thoughts arrive carefully, as if speaking them too loudly might feel like betrayal. Others speak in the opposite direction of having endured, of knowing now what it takes. Survival becomes proof of belonging. Packing in winter is rare. Leaving means travel, and travel still carries risk. Most decisions wait for thaw, but the choice forms now quietly during long nights by the fire. You imagine future winters, you measure yourself against them. You notice how attachment grows through hardship. The land that tried to break you now feels earned. Every drift cleared, every night survived binds you tighter. Leaving would mean starting that relationship again somewhere else. Some families decide winter after winter that this one will be the last. Then spring arrives, work begins, hope returns, and plans soften. Others make the decision firmly and follow through, loading wagons when roads open, leaving behind empty cabins that stand as winter-shaped monuments. You feel the weight of continuity. Staying means carrying forward knowledge. Leaving means releasing it. Neither choice feels simple. At night you sit and imagine both paths. Warmth without vigilance, or cold with familiarity. Winter has clarified what you value even if it has not decided for you. In the Old West, many journeys began not with opportunity, but with winter endurance reaching its limit. You stare into the fire, aware that survival gives you the privilege of choice, and winter, having tested you, now waits to see what you will do with it. You look back now not with nostalgia, but with clarity. Winter has passed, or at least loosened enough to let you breathe without calculating every inhale. The land still holds cold in its shadows, but it no longer feels hostile. It feels familiar. You remember how the season began, how sharp and unforgiving it felt, how every sound startled you, how every mistake carried weight. Somewhere along the way, winter stopped being an opponent and became a presence you understood. Not friendly, not gentle, but predictable if respected. The marks it leaves are subtle. Calloused hands, a habit of checking the fire before resting, an instinct to watch the sky without thinking about it. These stay with you long after snow melts. Winter rewires attention. You notice how people talk about it afterward. Briefly, without drama, they reference it in passing like something already settled. The hardest nights become shorthand: the storm, the freeze, the week the fire nearly failed. These phrases hold entire experiences without needing explanation. The land carries memory too. Bent fences, drifted corners, paths that curve slightly where snow once forced them to. Winter reshapes geography quietly, then pretends it did nothing at all. You feel gratitude, not relief. Relief fades quickly. Gratitude stays. For warmth that held, for people who noticed, for the small decisions that stacked in your favour. Survival feels less like triumph and more like alignment. As evening settles, you sit one last time by a fire that no longer needs constant watching. The room feels larger now, quieter in a different way. The cold outside still exists, but it no longer presses so hard. In the Old West, winter shaped lives without asking permission. Those who lived through it carried that shaping forward into how they built plans, trusted and rested. You carry it too now, even as the season loosens its hold. You let your eyes close, breathing slow and steady, feeling warmth, not just around you, but within you, earned over long nights and careful days. Wind down. Now everything softens. The fire has settled into a low, steady glow, no longer demanding attention. Its warmth spreads gently through the room, not urgent, not sharp, just present. Outside, the land rests in quiet layers, snow holding the day still, wind finally calm. You feel your body sink into rest muscles, releasing their long-held tension. The vigilance that winter acquired eases. Not gone, just relaxed. You have done enough for tonight. You have done enough for this season. Thoughts slow, images blur at the edges. The sound of breath becomes the loudest thing in the room, steady and unremarkable. Safe. Winter taught you patience. It taught you attention. It taught you how little is actually needed to endure. Now it allows you to rest. There is nothing left to plan, nothing left to watch. The fire will hold, the night will pass, morning will come when it comes. You drift gently, now carried by warmth, by quiet, by the deep reassurance that you are sheltered, and that the hardest part is already behind you. Sleep settles in slowly, kindly. Sweet dreams.